We
I
can
did the
slice it.
teacup.
I'm a little teacup, watch me, Millwork.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Joyce.
And I'm Tomek Gil.
And we're the husband-wife duo of 3F Living, an architecture and interior design firm here in New York City. We help our clients from the initial design to move-in day, and this time around, you're coming along on our journey to renovate our home, and today we're talking about millwork. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about millwork. And although Tomek is very knowledgeable in millwork, I'm going to kind of present to him what I would typically present to clients. And that way you can kind of understand our process and how we help our clients define millwork for their home and how that applies to the design style quiz that we took earlier on in the process. And then it'll also help us just communicate together on what exactly the style is and where we want certain types of millwork. So I'm going to present to you as if you're a client.
And I'll pretend I don't know anything about millwork.
So it usually starts with just a simple words of communication, right? So when we say flat panel, we want our clients to understand what is flat panel. What is shaker? Shaker can come in a variety of different sizes, and that's something that we kind of communicate through this presentation. So the first up is, what is the difference between flat panel and shaker cabinets? Well, flat panel is flat, what you see in the images here. Typically, you would see that in a more modern space. Shaker style is usually where they have that single kind of border around the cabinetry, and that can come in all different types of thicknesses and widths. Depending on the thickness and width is really dependent on your style, right? If you have a style that's more traditional and you want to lean in on that aspect of it, you would have a wider shaker molding. If you wanted something that was more modern, you might be looking at something that's like a 1 inch or a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch shaker, and we can go into that.
So it seems like shaker, the different thicknesses of shaker seem to have, like a moment right now.
Yeah.
There's so meaning that
Smaller shakers.
yeah, that they're in fashion. It's a wider shaker that's in fashion one year, and then a thinner shaker. Is there any difference between them? Do they lend themselves differently to different types of designs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because I'd say probably 10 years ago, when people wanted a more modern approach to their cabinetry but didn't want completely flat because they felt that it looked too commercial. But I think way back in several decades ago, when people wanted a more modern approach, they would use a shaker style. Now there's a bunch of different types of moldings that are out there. You can do quarter rounds, you can do inlays, you can do a bunch of different moldings, and that is more traditional. But in the more recent years, where everybody, I'd say as a generational whole, is really leaning into the more modern, the funny thing is that the shaker style cabinets, that single shaker, has really turned into the traditional cabinetry, as opposed to like the true traditional ones that have lots of moldings and which is still exists, and there's still a place and a moment for that.
Right.
But I would say generationally as a whole, people are looking at that thicker shaker and saying that's way more classic than it is modern.
Right.
Okay, so we've established that. Now, what is a classic shaker versus a modern shaker? Classic shaker you're going to find in like a 3 inch, 3.5 inch, 2 inch, 2.5 inch. Anything within that width is typically more of a classic or traditional shaker that you would see.
So more modern, the thinner, the more modern, basically.
Correct. Yes. And so then you go into the modern shaker. Here are just some examples of obviously past projects that we've done together on a 1 inch shaker, and what does that look like? A lot of times you will also see that on the classic shaker that the molding itself is actually raised higher. It's a thicker panel. So you just get more of that dramatic, like heavier border look to it that is more of that classic shaker versus the more modern, which has like, you know, a 1/4 inch kind of thickness versus like a 1/2 inch thickness. You know, look at.
Does the hardware that's selected ever kind of drive the shaker style, or does it typically go the other way around?
It typically goes from the cabinetry, and then the handles are kind of like layering. It's like the icing on the cake.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
kind of
So
pick
first
your
you pick the
pick
border
the cabinet.
style.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we kind of like, you know, enhance that. Then it goes into the treatment that is actually the finish that is actually on the cabinetry. So you will see cabinets that what we call are paint grade. So paint grade just means that you can pick any color from any color wheel, and you can get it sprayed to that color. So if you want a specific gray cabinet or a specific navy blue or white, even there's all different types of whites. Not white is the same as another white, as we know. And so paint grade essentially is that, right? It's picking out the colors, and the millworker is essentially spraying the cabinets those colors. So paint grade, right? So we know what paint grade is, and then we have wood stain. So wood stain, you could have, it could be in the category of typically white oak. We use white oak a lot. We use it on the floor. It's very, very durable. It's one of the hardiest of the woods that you could have on your floors or your cabinetry. It just wears very well, but it does have a specific look to it. So you're going to get those like thin, vertical, multiple grains in the wood. So when you can do like a custom stain to it, whether you want like a gray wash, a brown look, like a chocolatey look to it, or whether a lot of times we'll just take the floor, which is typically a European white oak, and we will custom stain the cabinetry to match the floors exactly. Okay, so we talked about the paint and the wood stain. Now we'll go into a little bit more like what does paint finish come in? Right?
Yeah.
So if you're painting, if you want that, you know, two-tone look or just like a uniform, just like a beautiful neutral color, a beautiful gray or something like that, you would start to think about your finish and what does that look like.
So we're talking matte versus shiny, or
yeah,
okay,
basically. So so typically we don't do matte because it's not durable.
Okay.
We really work within either satin finish or we do high gloss, because that's really where you're going to get, I guess there is a semi-gloss where it's not as glossy as high gloss, but there's not a huge difference there. It's still, one looks polished and one just looks like a satin finish. So you're going to get a little bit of kind of like a reflective quality. But the beautiful thing about satin finish is that if it chips, you don't see it. It also is easy to touch up if you get the satin finish. And also it tends, for, I guess my choice is that it looks more rich versus the high gloss. Now high gloss is beautiful, certain time and place. And also I would say when I use high gloss, I like to mix it in with a wood tone. So like a black oak or something like that, kind of gives it more of that higher level
so
to it.
Cold or something, or like
correct.
too glossy.
Yes,
everywhere.
and I think it looks too plasticky. Truly, like I find that the high gloss on the uppers and lowers, and it's also very hard to maintain high gloss on your lower cabinet. Uniform versus two-tone, right?
Right.
So uniform is basically whether it is, you know, a wood stain on your uppers and lowers, but it's the same color, so it's wood and wood, or whether it's paint grade, and that's paint, you know, sprayed to whatever finish you want, whether you do want high gloss or satin, or we use two-tone. And two-tone is, you know, high gloss on your uppers, maybe a wood veneer or a wood stain on your lowers, or you would do, you know, a darker color spray painted on your lowers.
And that's what I liked about that. Yeah.
And then you use your lighter tone on your upper. So then it goes into hardware, which is what you talked about. So when do you use hardware and what is the difference, right? So going into hardware, depending on your design style, right? So if you look at our last apartment, we used flat panel. So we had a more modern aesthetic. We wanted the Scandinavian modern look and feel to it. So we ended up doing finger pulls. That was our hardware, you know, and we accented the finger pulls with, you know, pieces of gold metal, you know, because we had a little glam moment in there. And that is technically hardware. That is how you are getting into your cabinet. So those are two different styles. And typically you would see finger pulls, and we'll go into what that looks like, is typically on flat panels. You rarely see it. Sometimes you do, but you rarely see it on like a shaker style. So it's usually more of a modern space.
It's almost like one too many details when you start combining the
it's also very hard for the mill worker to kind of produce.
Right, because the cabinet door gets thicker.
It's very thick and very heavy.
When you have to incorporate the finger pull.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's also that, again, functionality to it.
And it is a very modern look, so it complements that flat panel beautifully.
Beautiful. But typically for hardware, you have different types of hardware. You use knobs, pulls, edge pulls, cup pulls, and you have tie decks, which is like those linear types of pulls.
And Tidex is a brand, but they have a very specific kind of aesthetic.
It's an edge pull.
To that edge pull. Yeah. And that's why we say Tidex, because really there's one brand that kind of
there's the one brand that does it.
That comes to mind when we think about those.
So when we're looking at hardware, we like to kind of mix it up. So if you're using a shaker style, whether it's classic to transitional to modern, we like to change that up with doing either, you know, finger pulls on the upper cabinets, which you can do with shaker, a more modern shaker. And on the lower cabinets where we have drawers, we always try to use pulls, again, because of durability. It has a wider grip, so when you're pulling it, it's not going to throw the drawer out of alignment as much as a knob would. And on knobs, we typically use it on swing doors. So wherever you see a swing door, that's typically where we would put a knob. So finger pulls, right? So finger pulls, you can add accent to them. You can either paint them out the same color as the cabinet. You can use stainless steel reveals. You can use satin nickel. You can use black matte. You can use wood tone. So sometimes we'll take the wood floor and then do a strip, right?
That looks really nice, beautiful, especially with like
a Scandinavian,
and like,
look and feel to it.
It looks great.
Yeah. Okay, so then it comes into kitchen design cabinets, right? So when we're laying out cabinets, sometimes we think about where we want feature moments, right? Maybe we want, you know, maybe we have like a wine cooler that we're having in the lower cabinets, but the upper cabinets in that location, we might want glass, right? So where would we want glass cabinets? Where do we want a galley kitchen to maybe feel more open by installing a glass cabinet or a glass pantry, or to, in our case, to end cap our kitchen without making it feel like a heavy object. And then the types of glass that are out there. You can use clear glass, frosted, ribbed, colored glass. The possibilities are endless. But it is something that we always like to kind of bring up to clients, because they might have something that they've always thought about but never really verbalized to us. And it's something that we should know when we're laying out the space, if that's something they're interested into or something where they didn't even think about it before. So.
And if you do go with a glass cabinet somewhere in your kitchen or anywhere, don't shy away from incorporating lights into it.
Well, it actually goes into it goes into open shelving or niches, right? So this is another way that we incorporate accents, the icing on the cake, right? So sometimes we'll have what actually Tomek started doing in the designs with when we were doing flat panels and we were doing finger pulls everywhere. He would install this kind of like cubby shelf that was like long and under the upper cabinets. And a lot of times we would take like the floor color or like a white oak or a wood tone in some way and apply that to that kind of open cubby, which I think is beautiful.
Super convenient, by the way.
Oh, so convenient.
Yeah. Sometimes, you know, you want to grab your coffee mug or something.
Yeah, and not have to open up the door and like all the
things. And it kind of lives in that parking spot of like, you know, it's kind of like the day-to-day kind of stuff that you use in your kitchen.
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense that you're not constantly opening cabinets, and it's
Yes.
very accessible.
Absolutely. And I also think that it's nice too because we are in New York City, so we get these like random corners and beams and edges and all these things.
Yeah.
And you're trying to really architecturally align the cabinets to the existing conditions.
Right. Work the design into the existing space. Yeah.
And sometimes modularly, you just can't do it. But in a moment where you kind of have to break up upper cabinets, sometimes you can get like a little vertical niche where you have adjustable shelf in a wood tone and you put your cookbooks there, or you put your oils there, or you put picture frames or something. And so those are moments that we want to expand the knowledge to our clients. Like, let's think about this. When we get to this corner, how are we terminating that edge? And what is that going to look like? And what are you open to? Some people don't like open shelving because they're like, I don't want dust. Some people are like totally fine with it. And then lighting, Tomek's favorite thing. I mean, mine too, but like you really think about all the moments of where you can just have those little accents of light. And one that we do quite often is the toe kick lighting, which is actually really nice. Especially like if you have guests over or somebody that's like, or like your parents that are like in, seniors now, and you don't want them to trip. You want them to be able to see if they're staying over, and even like your kids, just to have like a little nightlight or a little glow. It's kind of nice to have that. And also when you're entertaining, just to have like a linear glow on the floor versus at eye level, it gives a different look and feel to it.
Yeah, it gives it like an ambient atmosphere. And like, we live in the city, and windows are, sometimes a scarce resource. So bringing lights into the interior of the apartment in these subtle ways,
in different levels,
it kind of just expands the space. It doesn't leave a dark corner that's kind of like that forgotten area. Every part of that apartment can be activated and used, and feel good for its end user. So
yeah, I mean, it's a given that we always incorporate upper cabinet lighting, so like the under cabinet lighting on your upper cabinets. But we always say, like, let's think, like, if you're going to have a glass cabinet, are we lighting up every shelf? Like, do we want to display something there?
Yeah, to me that's a must.
Oh, I know.
If you're going to do a glass door,
I know.
You kind of want to see what's behind it, without necessarily having to open it every time. So
other things that we do a lot are banquettes, and the banquettes that are attached to the kitchen really becomes part of the kitchen. And in our first apartment that we bought and renovated, Tomek, had this idea of just having like a strip that was like going behind the banquette and just kind of creating just a nice detail where it's not like in your face, but you just get this glow. And now we've installed it on like 3 or 4 apartments because of that, because it was so well executed.
And to complement it, you put tile behind that banquet.
And then we do like accents.
Which is kind of an unusual design choice for that particular space, but it made
you could use
all the difference.
Tile. And so this actually concludes all the categories of the presentation that I typically go through with a client. And then after we go through the presentation, we talk a little bit about how that applies to their design style. So I think like we could just kind of do a bridge version of that right now for us.
Okay.
Like
so take the reins.
Okay. So I'm thinking of doing, because you kind of honed in on the transitional aspect. I really like Art Deco, and I think we both landed on glam. So we kind of have a little bit of all that going on. I would like to see a modern shaker, but 1 inch is actually too big for me. Like, I would say that I would lean into more of like the 1/4 inch, which is like very kind of
just a little border.
It's almost like a shadow box. It is so scrumptious for a cabinet.
And when you put them together, you get like a 1/2 inch kind of edging.
Yeah, I mean, even a 1/2 inch is good, but I really like the 1/4 inch. I think it's just so beautiful, and it being well done like that, I really like it. I also would like to incorporate some type of like ribbing. We have a little bit all throughout the apartment.
Mhm.
I don't want to do like all the cabinets in that because that just is too much of a good thing. And nobody wants that. It's like telling a good joke over and over again, and then it's not good anymore. So, I think that like little bits I was thinking inlaid on just the drawers.
Mhm.
Like in the middle inlay
I'm
of the
into it. I
drawers.
like that. And
Just
I'm very
like,
tactile, so I
I
like to
know.
run my hand over some
And not the
and
slats.
feel the cabinet or
Yeah.
feel the wall finish. I really like that. To me, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
it
It
gives me
feels
it
good.
gives me an extra dimension,
Yeah,
to
and
everything.
And I think that it's like a place where you can add the accent. I'm kind of in between doing like a wood tone, like a two-tone, like a wood tone and a paint.
Okay.
So I'm kind of in between that right now, and I'm hoping that our renderer will be able to show us both options, and then we'll be able to see what we like.
So is this what we're gonna see in the next episode? Some of these renderings?
I mean, typically what we do is after this, I then show the clients, I share a Google Doc with them. And this Google Doc is something that I request homework from the clients to fill out. So it's basically everything that we spoke about, and it takes it into kind of a questionnaire where they can sit over the weekend amongst each other or with friends and family and just say, where do I want to be?
Right.
And you're not making the exact decision, you're picking 1 to 2 options, right? So for example, this first one is kitchen door front style. What are we? Are we a flat panel, classic shaker, 3.25, 3.25, 2.5, 1 inch, all of that? And so I think for us, we're somewhere actually between 1/4 to 1/2 inch and even 3/4. And that could be throughout our house, right? So like in the kitchen, we could do
And
a
it should be,
quarter.
right?
Huh?
It should be throughout the.
It should be, but it doesn't have to be
Okay.
exactly, right? So for example, our entry millwork, which is also very close in proximity to our kitchen, I would not use a 1/4 inch. I want only the kitchen in a 1/4 inch. And then I would maybe use there a 1/2 inch in a paint grade and have it like a pop of color or something, because it's kind of like the entry and a little like pop and a little moment where like our kitchen is more of like a neutral, space that we feel, comfortable in.
I'm excited for the renderings.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really good. So
what it's going to look like.
it goes through this, like picking out the, that, and then it goes into like color finish, like which we talked about, what we're looking at. It goes into finishes, like whether we want uniformed or two-tone, or maybe a little bit of both. And basically you fill out the questionnaire, and from the questionnaire, with the design style, with everything we spoke about, we internally start pre-selecting some finishes and materials to present to you. And a lot of times we will present that through a photorealistic rendering. And that's something that I think we really in the last year have really leaned into. And I think that it is so great because the clients can then see our vision instead of verbally trying to describe it, or even looking at finishes is great to physically feel them. But a lot of times you're not physically feeling the cabinetry until you select a contractor, because it's their millworker who's going to produce the samples. So a lot of times we're going into bidding, we're going into these things with just a design aesthetic that we like. And then once we get the contractor, we then have the contractor's millworker produce all the samples that we want. But again, it's based on the rendering. It's based on the visual of what the end result is.
So it's really helpful for them to understand the complexity of the project ahead
of time. From the contractor to a client.
At bidding stage.
Oh, yeah.
Of the job.
That's usually where we end this part of the millwork. It's almost like a part 1, part 2, because there's a lot of work that's involved in millwork. So, from this, we typically go back to our drawings and we update our drawings with whatever the styles that we're looking at, and we send that to our renderer, and we work together on that, and then we present it again to our clients and say, do you like it?
So that concludes our episode. If you like our content, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll be back with the follow-up to our millwork episode and show you what those realistic renderings are going to look like.